Good afternoon from Killashee, everyone, from wherever you are joining us in the world. A very warm welcome back to COSAC Connect. Especially warm welcome as this is your first ever COSAC experience. To get us underway today, we have Rosanna and Patrick. Rosanna is a specialist in design think and is a champion of diversity in next generation professionals. Patrick focuses on innovation and has an opportunity focus, which will be very familiar to those of a SABSA risk architecture persuasion. Both Patrick and Rosanna are relatively new to the COSAC community in comparison to the long-standing speakers we had throughout the rest of the event. But when they first arrived at COSAC, it was immediately apparent that we have a synergy that's made in heaven that focus on diversity, innovation, and opportunity. In my introduction, I mentioned that we like to make things challenging, not just for delegates, but for speakers as well. So we've set Rosanna and Patrick a little challenge today, which is to take a half-day, fully immersive, fully participative workshop originally scheduled for COSAC and to somehow make it work in short form on a virtual platform. So no pressure, Rosanna and Patrick. Thank you very much indeed for agreeing to do this, and the stage is now all yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'll kick off, and then Rosanna will carry us through the technical details. And I'd like to start out a little bit with the poll that we have already placed up there. Hopefully you've had a chance to see them. We have some questions for you. And the discussion we kick off today is really about securing innovation, and then you can flip that around and talk about innovating security. And we work a lot with the design thinking methodology. It's something that I find very comforting as a tool set, a mental toolbox that I keep coming back to. So this is quite interesting, and hopefully we'll see from the poll results, but my perception is that almost everybody is doing some form of innovation, digital transformation. Everybody's doing these days. If you weren't pretty far down that road already before COVID, you're pretty far down it now. And if you listen to Shan's discussion yesterday, I think both Rosanna and I were jumping out of our seat going, that point, that point, that point. So in our mind, this is everywhere, but we've been working on it for quite a while, and hopefully we can share some things with you that might help make it easier to bring it on board with you. So if you could step forward for me, Rosanna. The innovation is everywhere, and it seems sometimes that it is doing completely crazy bonker things. I work inside of heavy-duty financial infrastructure in the Central European area. And some of the ideas that we come up with, some of the ideas the fintechs come up with, absolutely sound insane. And part of our job is to try to secure them and keep a straight face while we're doing it. And then sometimes they look at us as if the things we're saying about security are absolutely insane as well. And somehow we have to make sure that these dreams and realities come together. Step forward. I was discussing some of the challenges I had in the major innovation efforts for our teams. Everyone wants to go agile and lean and all of these types of innovation methodologies, which often work counter to established cybersecurity methodologies. And there's a big challenge on how do we merge the two. And I had a model of a big program that I wanted to do that was a small program actually inside of our cybersecurity team. And one of my business leaders looked at me and he said, I really like your idea of a learning organization. And I really like how you've illustrated that as turning your cybersecurity team into a learning organization and addressing the culture. I said, oh, okay, thank you very much. And then I went to Wikipedia and had to go look up what a learning organization is. And indeed, this is very much in the mental models that I've been working with. And it's also the stuff that SABSA promotes and COSAC promotes. So I think that you find a lot of synergies with this. If we step forward. And the problem statement, I won't go through it again in much detail, but this is really the thing that we've been working with for a long time. And we've been telling ourselves we have to speak the language of business. And I had been turning that around a little bit and saying, how can I teach my business the language of cyber, and having some success with that. But further on, I realized that there were pockets of my business that were busy talking Lego. and I wasn't necessarily familiar with Lego. I could play with them, but I couldn't actually speak it. And so this was around the same time that Rosanna and I were partnering up on some efforts, and Rosanna, being a master at design think, drug me into this thing, and actually I found it to be just an amazing tool set that keeps working on and moving me forward through this. Skip forward. The other thing is, when we use this to look at innovating security, when we look inside our industry, as Shan so amply demonstrated around the cloud adoption and how she has to help people like me, gray in our beard, we've been around for a little while before the cloud, help us adjust into this new type of environment. But also, as I was looking at some of the challenges in our environment, and I was looking at the missing empathy layers, because a lot of stuff around design think starts a lot with empathy. And some of the language we hear, some of the phrases we hear, the users are our weakest link. I had started out thinking, okay, users are just another attack surface. But now I'm really seeing my users, my community, as a huge part of my defensive layers. Perfect getting in the way of better security. There's so many examples of people who won't take a step forward because it's not far enough, and they don't want to be responsible for that half measure. But the thing that really hit me upside the head was a study that talked about people who are STEM graduates, engineers, people like me, who seek confirmation and are known knowns. And this causes us to misidentify black swan events. And I want to share with you a couple of my misidentified black swans when someone got to hit me with the stupid stick, and what I tried to learn from that. And hopefully you'll be there along with me as well. And one of the things about design think, no, please go ahead, it's forward, this is the right one. Design think is an iterative sequential process where you keep coming back, and you start with empathy, you define what the problem is, you work on some of the ideas, you prototype, you test it. This actually sounds awfully familiar to some of us, right? Skip forward. We've seen this before. We've seen this in the Deming cycle, plan, do, check, act. We've seen this in John Boyd's OODA loop. And one of the things I also, this helped me do, was to reread the OODA loop and look inside of the orient part of that, where John is really talking about understanding who the opponent is, having empathy with the opponent. Not kind empathy, but actually understanding who these people are and what drives them and what their motivations are. We had a chance to work with some international hostage negotiators, and they also really, really emphasized understanding who your opponent is and empathizing with them. So this is one of the things that, no, it's good, let's go to the dog, that also helped me realize where I had been making some of the mistakes. And we had been doing a beauty contest a while back. We were looking at a bunch of different vendors to see who could fit our needs in our major infrastructure. And we had a really interesting startup coming out of Amsterdam. A guy, his dad, and 3 friends in a basement flat in Amsterdam. And as with all large enterprises, we sent them our third-party security review, basically a stripped-down version of ISO 27001, and asked them to fill out our checklist spreadsheet. And then they were supposed to bring in, and we sat about 20 people from the bank staring at these 3 guys. And by the time they get partway through, they're really, really frustrated, and you can see it in their face. They want to talk about this great idea, and I want to talk to them about their security. And they get to the physical security, and they lose their temper, and they say, "What do you want us to say about security, physical security? I mean, we have a dog after all." And afterwards, these were always the guys who had a dog. And it was funny at the moment, but it actually wasn't funny. Number one, it stuck in my mind because I wished I had always responded differently. Instead of saying, and continuing on down through my checklist, I'd ask them what kind of dog. Because, of course, a small barky dog like this, that's really aggressive, is a great alerting mechanism on your defensive layer. Whereas if it's a great golden Labrador or something like this, the kind of dogs that I grew up with, they're not so great on the protection, but they're really good greeters in the building. And for me, this was a bit of a black swan when I wasn't able to empathize enough with my business partners. And so I count this definitely as a failure. And as I mentioned, I had been working hard to get my business to understand cybersecurity a little bit better. And one of my favorite business innovators gave me a call one day, and he said, "Patrick, get a ticket on the Eurostar. We're going to Paris. We have to meet a startup." And I said, okay, well, let's go. And we go and we meet this startup, and it doesn't go so well, obviously, or else this wouldn't have been such a good lesson. But I thought it was going fabulously from the perspective of cybersecurity and what my role was in reviewing this vendor and my effort in making my business quite aware of cybersecurity. Halfway through, my business leader was querying the CEO of the startup and basically finding out for himself that the security and the operational continuity needs that this fintech had worked for themselves were really not suited for a bank of our stature and for the type of operational function that we were going to be using them in. As we're walking away from that, and I can see him thinking about it, I ask him, when I get back to Brussels, do you want me to write this up? And he says, no, Patrick, it's okay. I've got this. And I said, oh, this is wonderful. We went back to Brussels. About a month later, the CEO of the fintech writes a nasty post on the internet about how these silly banks don't understand what's going to happen to them with the fintech revolution and how they're destined to be the dinosaurs of history. And I do what any internet native does. I go up on LinkedIn and I write my own aggressive post saying, dear startup, please tell me your security story. And the fact that so many of these times when I work with startup and innovators, they're not ready to talk about cybersecurity. And I took a long time writing this. I had about 6 of my favorite cybersecurity architects review it and give me feedback into it. And I think 7 people read it in the whole planet, and it changed absolutely nobody's mind at all. But I still consider this a success for a little while, until about a year and a half later, I receive an alert from one of my partner sister banks in another country. And it says, anyone using this fintech, be aware, there's some vulnerabilities inside of their suite. They're doing some things wrong. Don't use them. If you are using them, call us right away. We have an incident. And I realized that my success story was actually an abysmal failure because I had protected my citadel, but I hadn't protected the citadels around me. I hadn't protected my family and my responsibility. I hadn't done that bon père de famille that my French colleagues talk about. But what's more, I didn't realize at the time that this fintech was part of a innovation incubator that my group had invested several millions of euros in, and we were actually expecting to get some benefit out. Furthermore, my business colleague was trying to solve a problem when he went to this fintech, and he didn't solve that problem in the end. No one else took their place, and so that problem remained unsolved, and that solution did not reach the market, and we were not able to serve our customer with that interesting solution. So I had 1 success and 3 failures out of these. And this is another example where I did everything right, and yet it was still 3 times wrong. Forward, please. We know citadel thinking. It's almost the opposite of design thinking in some ways. I love this Vauban citadel as a model for my segmented citadel that is quite well defended. And I have a lot of people that help me build this. Right now, I work with a team of about 200 really interesting cybersecurity professionals. And a few years back, I had created an award, and it was the Thanks for Nothing Award. And this was an award that we gave to our employees. Now, I called it the Thanks for Nothing. That's not what we really call it. We call it Security Champions. But it came to me when one of my employees had done something amazing, and it was not her job to stop this attack. But they were on the front lines. They saw that one of our customers was being attacked. And the challenge was that the issue in here was that my colleagues who are supposed to be protecting our enterprise, that's their job to protect our enterprise, but it wasn't her job to protect our enterprise. So we gave them the award. And if you step forward, Rosanna. There was a moment afterwards when I went up to her and I said, well, what did you think about this event? And she completely floored me with 1 single sentence. And what she said was basically, you spent 2 hours talking about your customers, but you never once talked about my customers. And that completely was correct. And this was another black swan event where I realized I was focusing very much on my citadel and very proud of my citadel, but outside of my citadel was where my clients existed. And so I was completely missing the message and missing the point. And I spent the next year and a half talking to my customers and trying to understand what was going on with them. And this also was a point where I kept coming back to design thinking to try to understand more and more about what I had been missing and what was necessary in here to get my cybersecurity citadel to be more reflective of actually what we need. Step forward. And please ignore the numbers in here. This is stolen from one of the think tanks, and I think it's a little bit out of date. And indeed, the principle here, though, is that supposedly cybercrime costs us X number of billions per year. We spend, as an industry, X number of billions in our defense. That's our salaries. That's the vendors that we work with. I hope I'm not doing any sales and marketing messages. That is prohibited, and we mean that indeed. But there's a lot of sales and marketing that does go on. So if we lose 600 billion, skip forward, Rosanna. And we spend so much on it. There's another risk, and this was one of the things I was thinking yesterday when we were talking about the definitions of risks. One of my biggest risks is the opportunity that something really cool doesn't happen. Now, we're often looking at the bad things or the risk that something good happens is really this risk. And this is where the discussion is the opportunity cost. Cybercrime slows down the pace of innovation. I'm not able to do cool things and bring cool things to the market because I can't secure it. I'm not able to partner with interesting people because we can't bring it to market. So this is really talking about the risk management approach and the risks that we run in not doing things and why it's so important to make sure that we are changing how we deal with cybersecurity, changing our teams, changing our viewpoints of it, and also making sure that we're in those Lego rooms. Skip forward.
Okay.
Rosanna, what are you?
Can it sound okay just to make sure? Patrick, is my sound okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, great. So thank you so much, David, and thanks, Patrick. So my part in this presentation will be really focused on design thinking and, to answer some questions like, when do you use it? It's not something you could use everywhere. Definitely, there are cases where you should use it, and some cases where I said, oh, don't use it. So when do you use it? What are the tools that you need? What are the ingredients to make it, really succeed? And I'd like to give some examples as well on what we have done, Patrick and I, in the last 4 years working together on Cyber Wayfinder project of bringing diverse profiles into cybersecurity. So first off, what I want to say is it's great when you're working on a wicked problem, and especially that characteristic of a wicked problem that's, peppered with uncertainty, a lot of unknowns, you're in uncharted territory, and you don't have the data to back your decisions. And in addition to that, you can't really set clear goals. You have fuzzy goals because there's too much unknown. So that's where I would say design thinking actually shines. A little flashback to my previous life as a designer. So I come from architecture. I built a few houses, worked in teams that built hotels. This is where I actually learned design thinking. And I think most of you will have had experience with an architect, especially those who have built houses, renovated houses. And I would say design thinking really goes into the first phase of design, what we call programming, and the schematic design phase, when you're the architect and the client are trying to understand each other. The architect has to have a deep understanding of the needs of the client, and the client should be able to communicate it. But usually, and I know this for myself as well, it's so difficult to verbalize your needs. And sometimes you're not even aware of your needs. So a classic example in this slide is like, you get a client call and they say, okay, here are as-built plans. I'd like you to renovate my house. And then you discover, oh my God, the as-built plans don't match the building itself. And you start, measuring the rooms, measuring walls and doors and windows. And then you start talking and engaging with a client, and you realize at some phase of the programming, when you're trying to understand the client, that they actually don't want a renovation, they actually want a new building. So then you have to pivot and say, okay, then how about this? And you start to try to understand what is it they need, and you try to come up with all these schematic designs, really low resolution sketches, until finally you have a schematic design where you say, okay, if you agree this is how the spaces should be, then I can go on to the next level, which is the design development stage, which then continues on to the construction drawing phase, and then you get a building permit. So I would say design thinking really belongs in the very first part of the design, where you're trying to understand the needs and trying to understand things that your clients or your customers cannot verbalize. So transferable skills, yay. I mean, I learned all that from my life as an architect. And so I'd like to talk about Einstein, the Einstein quote here. If I had only 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and only 5 minutes finding solution. So this is what we call, and I just talked about, as an architect, it's about need finding the need, and you're crafting as well the problem statement around this need. So what we're actually doing is we're designing with our client. So we look at the client, try to see what they need, try to understand, but we don't actually know what we're looking for, because you have to understand, if you're going to build a house for someone, or you're going to build anything for a group of people, you'll have to understand how they move, what they think, what are their fears, and what are the pressures, what's pressuring them, what makes them act the way they do. So, and based on these needs, then you will, craft your problem statement around these needs. And this is what differentiates, or this is how you define a human-centered approach to problem solving. So you look to your stakeholders for design inspiration, and this design inspiration is hidden somewhere in some of the needs that they cannot verbalize. So once you understand that, then actually looking for the solution is easier. So that's what the quote from Einstein said: the need finding. If you make mistakes in the initial phase, where you're still finding out more stuff, something about the human factor of your client or your stakeholders, any mistake you make in this phase doesn't cost a lot. But any mistake you make further down the line, they cost a lot. So this is very important to actually understand why the need finding, which is design thinking, is so important. Now, we have 3 pillars in design thinking, and I think everybody's familiar with this. You have the human factor, desirability. You have technology, which is the feasibility, and then the business side, the viability. And we all know this. How important all these factors are, and the overlap where you get to, meet all the needs of all these 3 pillars is where design innovation starts. So this is like a no-brainer. Everybody knows this. The difference with design thinking is where you start. So with design thinking, you start with a human factor. You just start with desirability, and that's where you're really answering the need of the stakeholders, whoever you're working with, instead of starting with a technology or with a business model. So that is the main difference, I would say, of design thinking. Let me see. Also, the human factor, the desirability, this is actually what also brings another added complexity to the problem, usually. So if you start with the human factor, then you're already working and trying to untangle this complexity. Yeah, and I guess some of the mistakes we make is sometimes we have a lopsided focus on technology, or maybe even on the business side, and and the human factor comes later on, if at all. So maybe I think that's something that we can reflect on. Now, empathy, and I'd like to also call it cognitive empathy. So when you're trying to uncover these hidden needs from your stakeholders, whoever they may be, the people you work with, the people you're solving a problem with, uncover their latent needs. What is it that's pushing them to act the way they do? What is it what are the pressures, what are their KPIs, what are what are their goals, and from understanding their needs, you need to understand as well their emotions. So when they say this, what do they actually think? When they do this, what are they actually feeling? So a strong emotion that I think is very common in the corporate ecosystem is fear. So what are the fears that people are dealing with, either on a professional level or maybe even on a personal level? So this will help you understand how to work with people. Another thing is, maybe it's trivial, but what brings them joy? So maybe that's also a question we don't ask enough. What will bring this and this Mr. or Miss stakeholder joy? So on a professional level, or on the context of this project. So understanding that and seeing people as partners, and cognitive empathy, knowing that they think differently, because we all have different life experiences, and we are all molded by our experience. And so we will naturally have different ways of thinking. And so understanding this and putting it on the same level as you, and not putting any hierarchy in this, and just understanding that all your stakeholders are actually co-designing your product with you. So that's why understanding, and that's why empathy is a very important thing that you will need in the first steps of design thinking. Now, I'd like to talk about like what we've done, and just as an example. So if you can see the image behind, this is like our stakeholder map when we were starting something like 5 years ago on Cyber Wayfinder, and we're just trying to understand what is it we're dealing with. So we started with a problem statement like, how might we bridge the cybersecurity skills gap? And this problem, it's just way too broad, and you're just frustrated just from the very beginning. There's way too much stakeholder involved. And so we thought, okay, let's focus on one stakeholder. And so we say, how might we increase diversity in security teams? So, focusing from the perspective of security teams, what are the needs of our managers, or the hiring managers, or the teams, understanding their position, what are their thoughts and emotions, and what makes them act the way they do? We are all human beings, and we are driven by our thoughts and emotions. And at some point, as the project was evolving, the problem statement would evolve as well, because then we said, okay, I think that we have to address, for example, the women or the minority groups that we're trying to pivot into security. How might we help them? And so we have to understand their fears, their challenges, what are the societal pressures or expectations, and what are their insecurities around technical topics, and how can we address those? And again, we're evolving constantly our problem statement. So like, how might we increase employment opportunities for unconventional profiles and during a pandemic? So, it's a constant evolving of this problem statement, pivoting, and then implementing, the strategy we implement after we've pivoted our problem statement. It follows and pivots as well, and changes, and we discover new ways of doing things, all towards the same outcome. So this is like, it's a continuous reframing of the problem statement. So that's just one example of how we've been using design thinking. So what do you need if you're working on a wicked problem and you decide, okay, I'm going to try out this design thinking? What do I need? Well, first you need a beginner's mindset. So you're open to learning. Remember, you're working with uncertainty. This is uncharted territory. There are no experts. So all mistakes you make are learning opportunities. An explorer's mindset. So even in the midst of uncertainty, you don't lose your curiosity. You're curious, and you're keeping your eyes wide open for any insight you might catch. Bias to action mindset. This is the build, test, and learn. It's creating rapid prototypes. And again, prototypes is like when design thinking talks about prototyping, it means low resolution prototypes. It could be a set of clustered Post-it notes. It could be Lego blocks that you create, anything where you're using your hands and trying to visualize your ideas, because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is you're trying to communicate your idea, and you're observing how your stakeholders react to your idea. And this way you get to understand more of how they're doing, how they think of your ideas, and what are their thoughts, and what are the thought process, and what are what are the challenges they're faced with, and a reframing mindset. So you usually get you get stuck in a problem. One way to get unstuck is, well, change your perspective. And the shared invention mindset is like ego has to go in the back seat. Radical collaboration means you want to unleash the power of collective intelligence. There's a lot of uncertainty. You need to see it from different perspectives. And so that's where diversity comes in. And this, at this point, I'd like you to answer. Actually, we have a second poll with a question: is going to cloud an engineering challenge or an engineering problem, or is it a design problem? So that's a nice question that you could please go to the polls and answer. And well, what is the difference? So I actually am an architect, you all know that, but I also have a master's in engineering. So I do understand the tension between wanting to be creative or just wanting to analyze and come up with with a solution. So the thing with an engineering problem, usually your goal is clearer. You know, the outcome you want is clearer, and the process is a little bit more linear, and you have a little bit more data to work with and less unknowns. In a design problem, you have a lot more unknowns, a lot more uncertainty. Your goals are fuzzy because there's too much unknowns to actually set that goal. And the process is usually non-linear. You're going back and forth, back and forth. And so why do you do this? Because you need to understand, you need to create data, because there is no data. So if you look at the left-hand side, you have this quadrant, and in the top right quadrant where it says revolutionary, well, that's where innovation is, and that's where data doesn't exist. So you can't make these data-driven decisions because the data doesn't exist. So you need to create data, or data points. So how do you do that? It's an iterative process of discovery. Every time you come up with your low-res prototypes, you show it, you show it to your stakeholders, and then you co-design it with them. You find out, oh, okay, this is the reaction I get. This is, and there you're trying to get more data points, accumulate data points to understand more your stakeholders. So that is the main difference between an engineering problem and a design problem. Go to the next slide. And this is also something that this is very important. Is, you know, as a designer, I've been, taught how to think creatively, but as an engineer, you are taught to think analytically, and both are great. I mean, both have really great advantages. You just have to know when do you put your creative thinking hat and when should you do analytical thinking. So I call this the divergent versus convergent in design thinking lingo. And when you're opening and starting out with a problem, there are too many unknowns and you're going for quantity. So you get your team and you're not saying any idea is bad. The more ideas you have, the better. This is when you're divergent, thinking in a wide range and doing your divergent thinking. And you collect all these ideas and you see the synergies, try to discover, is something going to emerge by moving this around, and and then you come up with certain solutions, and that's where you say, okay, now's the time to analytically think. I mean, we had that process where we moved around the ideas, tried to understand our stakeholders. Now I go, okay, now I have to decide which of these will I prototype, which will I build? And that's where you put on your analytical thinking hat, and then you go for quality. That's when you're starting to filter out the ideas you think are not worth pursuing. So the problem most people have is that they're thinking analytically too soon in a project, which kills really the creativity in a team. So that's more or less what I would like you guys to get out of this presentation. If you do, that's wonderful. This is just really the most important, one of the most important parts of design thinking. The SABSA framework. So from my perspective, it's a great tool to enable this kind of divergent thinking, because you're trying to understand the problem or the challenge from different perspectives. You're asking different questions. And it's also it's a wonderful way to discover the latent needs of all your stakeholders. So I would say this is a great example of divergent thinking, or enable the team to think in a divergent way and a creative way. Now the post-it notes. Everybody thinks design thinking is all about post-it notes. These are what we call modular artifacts, because whether they're Lego blocks or post-it notes or cards, these are dynamic notes. These are ideas that you can move around. And even if with a diverse team, you'll still not have enough randomness in there. You'll want to get all your, and each sticky note is an idea that you can move around, cluster with other ideas, and try to make links, create borders, create axes, or even experiment with sequences. And this is one way that you can put randomness into your design thinking, into your creative thinking phase, where, you know, by creating this randomness, it helps you reframe problems, or especially when you're stuck. Another thing is, in the picture, you can see happy faces, and behind them the post-it notes. So these are like when we were talking with international hostage negotiators, and we were trying to help them brainstorm on how we can use their skills in the cybersecurity context. And again, you come up with a lot. You go for quantity in the first phase. You try to mix and match things, and try to see if something emerges, any synergies emerge. And then when you're closing, that's when you say, okay, now let's filter out the ideas that we think we should pursue. So I'm gonna have to see if I'm still on time. I hope I'm still on time. This is a summary. So this is what Patrick was talking about: the empathy, define, ideate, prototype, test, and assess. You know when to converge and when to diverge. So at the beginning, usually you want to go for quantity. You're diverging. Don't worry. Later on in the process, you'll be converging. And also, it's a shared invention. So you need to see your stakeholders as your co-designers. Ego in the backseat. Complexity is better addressed by diversity. And I'm not talking about identity diversity. I'm thinking of cognitive diversity. Starting with a human-centered approach, that means you have to start with a good problem statement. So it's a very nonlinear approach. You'll be going back and forth, and just be patient and understand the process. And I think this is where Patrick takes over, and we're almost done.
This is one of the points that I really enjoyed in like focus on, where it's really important who our companions are in doing this shared invention, the radical collaboration, making sure that we chase a dream, whatever that objective is, once we still keep figuring out that objective. And even if it changes, it's about making sure that you're doing something that your entire group is excited about, rather than just trying to be one better than the competition, or to sell one more widget at a lower cost point. So this is one of the things, quote taken from Simon Sinek, who's always ready with a good quote for that. I think, Rosanna, do you want to take this?
Yeah, so this is just about, understanding that where you are right now is okay, so that you don't start blaming people or trying to find fault in people. Accepting where you are, where your team is, where you are with the challenge that you're working on, and not to fight gravity, and just to focus on what's actionable. So you are here, and that's okay. You accept that, and then you move on and just focus on what's actionable. So this is what this slide is all about. And now we come to the challenge. Oh, sorry, okay. You wanted to add something, Patrick.
Well, I was going to say, a lot of times with our teams, we're trying to get them involved in this type of activity, and getting people, we can all say, oh goodness, we're so far away from where we want to be. And I think there's that phrase about the first step, of the journey. So it's really about saying, okay, it's going to be confusing and we're uncertain, but let's go forward with it. But indeed, let's go forward into our challenge.
Yeah.
So we pulled this off of LinkedIn, I think 2 days ago. When we presented a slightly revised version of this at COSAC before, one of the things that happened in fine COSAC fashion, we had a bunch of exercises that we had planned to work people through. Some of the same exercises we'd worked other people through, things that we used ourselves. And the first exercise out of the chute, one of the guys said, but this is the problem I have in my workplace right now. And it was a problem around how to build an interesting SOC environment and some of the challenges in our security operations center. And as we've continued thinking about this problem and working with some other people who are working on the challenges of how to build an interesting SOC environment and how to keep our teams engaged and some of the challenges that are there, we wanted to come back to this in a refreshed way. And so we went out and Rosanna found this instantly. And I hope you've been taking a chance to read this, so you can actually read it a little bit. And there is actually, what's that?
It's a poll, so they'll have to actually read it and answer the question.
So there's yes, exactly. So I'll share a little bit with it. A SOC level 3 analyst, a senior expert, point of escalation for levels 1 and 2, identify malicious operations, evaluate during security crisis, technical reference. You're a key player when it comes to being the IBM Q radar expert, manage. The thing about it also is when you look at the profile, and I love reading job descriptions because we read so many of them, and you look at it, and the first thing you want to do is you want to stick a fork either in your own eye or in the person who wrote it, and then you say stop, be empathetic, try to understand what is the problem that the people are trying to resolve here, and what is it that they're actually looking for when they're creating their ideal person. There's actually a thing in human staffing they call the purple squirrel. And we talk about this purple squirrel as this person who doesn't exist. They have a master's in software engineering, 5 years experience in cybersecurity. They're an expert in a particular technology that might not have even existed for the number of years of expertise they're supposed to have. They're certified left and right and center. They're customer oriented and team players curious. And the seniority level is entry level. I love that part.
Sorry,
Rosanna,
I'm just doing this because otherwise I don't see you. So I was wondering if you can read the poll out loud.
Okay, so if we flip over to the poll, okay, what do we got here?
Okay. Right. Okay. So.
I can read the poll for you.
Can you please? I think it's missing a bit.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. James, can you call the poll up on the other screen for me, please? Okay, no, I've got it here. So the first poll was, if you have or had a corporate innovation effort, cybersecurity is integrated is 57%. It would be business only is 22%, and other, not say, or uncertain is 21%. You want to read the second poll at the same time?
That's actually good news. At least cybersecurity is integrated. Yay! No, that's wonderful. That's really great.
Would you like the second poll?
Yeah.
Okay. Is going to the cloud an engineering problem or a design challenge? Engineering is 11%. Design is 86%.
Right. Okay. That's
people paid attention to what Shan said yesterday. That's good news, huh?
Okay. Third question was, are the above questions being asked in your organization or team before the start of a recruitment process? Yes is 26%, no is 54%, and uncertain is 20%. So
actually the question that we wanted people to reflect on is, first of all, does this person exist? You know, another thing is that if this person did exist, would they want to work with the person who wrote the job, or with the hiring manager that either wrote or asked somebody to write the job description? And I think there was a third question that we didn't write. Do you think this job leads to a burnout? But we didn't include that.
Or what happened to the last person who had that job? Why is that role open? Yeah.
Right, and why or why not, and how is that? So please tell us in the chat. So I guess now we're just open to questions.
Okay. So while we're bringing the first on-stage questioner on stage, I think is Joan O'Leary, we have an opening question from Dimitri, who you may remember from yesterday. Hopefully, Dimitri, you're still awake over there in Australia. Thank you for staying up so late. Dimitri's question is, how would you handle a customer who does not actually want to define the goals specifically? My customers are product managers and delivery leads of the organization, and they're crazy about agility. So often I hear that they don't really know what they're building until they try and fail a lot. Either of you anything to say in response to that before we go to Mr. O'Leary?
I'd say it's a shared problem, so we absolutely hear that and absolutely validate it. And I think one of the things that also helps in this challenge, and one of the reasons why I think it's so important to get involved up front, is that if you're there in the design phase before it gets to a project manager, because indeed to get to a project manager, you have to have done some sort of budget and activity. And this is why, for me, getting into the Lego rooms are more important than getting into the boardrooms. Boardrooms are where they make big decisions, but I have micro decisions happening all around my enterprise constantly. And if I'm able to be in those Lego rooms, I'm able to have much, much more influence about what goes on. And then also when I'm dealing with this stuff, it's not that a project manager comes to me or a program manager comes to me and says, I don't want to do that, or the business hasn't given me a proper set of requirements. It's, well, no, let's go back to Frank or Sam or Jason or whoever the business is or whoever the stakeholder is. We know them by name, they know us by name, and we've built credibility with them. So for me, this is the easy answer to a tough question. That's a constant effort and a constant battle. It's no easy answer to it.
And I think also you need to be transparent. So if you say, we're trying something out, you don't need to name it, because maybe it's just what you say, it's like cliche, design thinking is cliched, and people think of, I don't know, hippie artist or designer. So you don't need to name it, but you could be transparent and say, look, we're trying something new, and we will probably be asking you some questions, and we'll be, presenting you things and want to see what you think. And, approach them as co-designers. They have, they're accountable for the results as well. So you don't go there thinking, okay, I just need to get all the information and then I'm coming out with a perfect solution. No, they need to understand that they have co-responsibility to the success, or, to get a good outcome. So
thank you very much indeed. Dimitri just posted in the chat at Patrick a great response. Thank you. So I'll take that as question answered. Over to you, Mr. O'Leary. Great to see you on camera.
Well, it's nice to be here on camera or wherever. Patrick, this one's really for you. You mentioned opportunity costs, and I think that's something that's very real, but it's also very hard to measure with any sort of accuracy. How do we give management realistic and acceptable opportunity costs?
So this is one of the things I have struggled with a great deal.
Well, same here.
Yeah. And as often happens when I'm struggling with a problem that has no answer, I have to ask myself if I'm asking the wrong problem or trying to solve it with the wrong tool. And it goes directly to the concept of metrics and my overuse of metrics and my ability to try to do a value at risk model and wanting to put it into a spreadsheet or put it into a tool that is linear. The part that has been amazing for me is the more I work with my business partners, the more they see me sweat. They see how hard I'm working for them. They see the doubt burden I carry on their behalf and I'm sharing with them. And I build that level of credibility. And this is one of the biggest challenges, is to give up the number, to give up the metric, and to stop trying to provide that metric. And to say, go ahead.
There's more comment on this. Maurice gave a comment about how opportunity, am I talking about leverage to help you achieve goals or increase targets? And what I'm really talking about is the things that you don't do that you would have done. So it's really increasing targets. Peter Sidesma also says, wouldn't most management already be clear on the opportunities? I don't think so. I think that's one of the problems.
I love my management team, and the more I see how burdened they are and how much they work with a lack of certainty, the more respect for them I have every single day. And
Yeah.
that's where I keep coming back to the design thing. It's the methodology and the framework that allowed me to let them see me sweat. I had a need to come prepared to every single presentation with the perfect slide deck or the best numbers. And this is one of the things that I think when we're really truly collaborating and doing a co-journey and co-creation on it, they get inside of our heads as much as we get inside of theirs. And to me,
Yeah.
that's what's been really exciting about this. I just love it.
Good deal. Thank you. David, I've got another one for Rosanna. Can I ask her that?
Yeah, while you're on stage, ask the second one, John. You might as well.
Okay, because I got a third one too. Rosanna, I keep hearing you say needs. You're talking about needs, but often they're dealing with wants, not really needs. How do you handle this?
So wants is what they verbalize, but it might not be what they actually really need. I mean, want is something that somebody put in their speech for them and that they're just parroting out. I mean, it's very superficial, but the need is something that even some people wouldn't want to own up to. I don't know if it's okay to say that.
Yeah.
But we are under a lot of pressure to perform, to meet our targets, and sometimes they will say we want this without actually verbalizing what it is that's pressuring them, to move or behave in a certain way. So I would say, you need to dig deeper if they say want, and you don't stop there. I mean, you don't, say no to their wants either, but there are ways to flesh out those needs.
Okay, this one last thing. This is for you too. Rosanna, you're very articulate and clear and understandable for this audience. But I'm afraid that a board of directors seeing some of your charts will nod their heads in seeming agreement, but will be completely lost.
Well, when did they ever see charts of future targets ever, accurately reach that target? I mean, that's a question.
Thank you very much indeed, John.
Okay, thank you.
We'll move now to Shan John, or for those who are new to COSAC, Shan John MBE, please. Shan, the stage is all yours.
You always do that to me, David.
Always, and I always will. It's a wonderful honor.
I've got my.
That you got it. Oh, there it is.
Yeah. So, absolutely love this session as always, and the design thinking thing is absolutely amazing. And so my question is, how do we get more of our industry to engage with the design thinking, getting them to move beyond that technology focus to look at the human? So we talk about it a lot, but we quite often don't make that adjustment. What would your thoughts be on that?
So, of course, having lovely people like Rosanna and I speak at a conference with an august membership like this, that's step number one. Thank you. Check. One of the other things that Rosanna and I did that we had a lot of fun with is we actually took my team and we came in with some of the things that we use in our program for newcomers, and it's Design Think Your Professional Life. Mm-hmm. And the purpose of this program was to make it personal for people and say, how do we rebuild your own CV, your own definition of yourself as a cybersecurity worker using this tool set? And that is something that we've actually had a great deal of fun with. So I think it's a difficult question, but it's also a lovely question, because I would like to say we've got an amazing group of people who can help us on this journey. We've got you. Esther also is an advocate. So I think I would love everyone who's listening to this to dig into this a little bit deeper and make it part of your tool set.
So I have a success story. I think half a year ago, so I live in Brussels, and I've been working on this advocacy for, diversity and all that. And so every now and then they invite me over to speak at a panel. And so they get to know me. And at some point, I also advocate actually for technology and education in schools, like to train the teachers to actually be able to bring technology into the classroom as creators, so programming, all these coding skills. And so they asked me, well, actually, we have are, so the European Commission has these DGs. They're like the, I don't know, departments or ministers, and they're all headed by a director general. And so the director general of Digit, which is the IT department of the European Commission, came to me and said, could you create a programming lesson for the DGs? And I was saying, oh my God, there are 26 DGs, one for each member state, and I said, sure. And for the deputy director generals as well. And I said, sure, let's do that. So I did some programming skills. We did a mobile app. But then I said, you can't just know how to build a mobile app. You have to know what it's for. And so I had half of my slide deck was on design thinking, because I think we don't want people crazily just creating just because they want to create it. Just because you can create it doesn't mean you should create it, right? So that was, and I think that was followed. And I spoke a lot on design thinking. And after that, I said, if you really want, the experts, there's, Stanford D School, there's IDEO.org, there's IDEO.com. There are other consultants out there. I mean, try it out with your team. So I hope that I made a small impact on the European level. I mean, so that's a small success story.
Great, thank you.
Thank you both very much indeed. Does that answer your question, Shan?
Yes, perfect, thank you, thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. We have just short of 5 minutes left and a big queue of questions. So the next one is a no-stage question from Rahul Lobo, again in Australia. Thank you for being awake, Rahul. He says, Patrick, you mentioned success a few times. How do we influence the definition of security success using design thinking in the crowded security tool product space industry, where success is looked on as stopping things or defense? Spending money on shining tools to create a false sense of security, big budgets, larger security teams equals more secure rather than positive benefit.
Wow. That question had me scared to death until he got to the end point. Because if I read that question, he's actually solved it. Because when we have to look at is what is the pain point right now in cybersecurity teams? It's the fact that we're overspending and creating citadels that are unwieldy, and that we're spending lots of money on shiny toys. We've been doing it for the last 30 years and it doesn't work. Another favorite Einstein quote, I think, is the definition of insanity is doing the same thing you've been doing all along and expecting a different result. So going forward with the design think credo to say we can use this to radically rethink what we've been doing with the goal to see what can we throw away. Okay, Shan, I'm going to bring it back to you. Last time at COSAC, she brought up a reference to
Marie Kondo. I know you're...
Marie Kondo, Spark Joy. And literally, can we go back through our security layers and find out what we can throw away to save money? So there's one way to step forward into it right here and right now. But then also look at bringing in new things and really look at it challenging, not just on a budget. And this is one of the things. My enterprise is not budget constrained on cybersecurity. We're time and change constrained. There's only so many things we can do, and there's only so much change we can absorb in a given time. So using this to prioritize what we do and to make sure it works more harmoniously is, okay, that sounds like marketing speak, huh? But that's the goal that I keep in mind as I'm trying to make this work for me. Rosanna, do you have a...
No, I think we don't. Let's go to the next.
Yep, we've only got a couple of minutes. Let's see if we can put you under pressure with another couple really quickly. So next one is from Valerie Lyons. Thanks again for a brilliant presentation yesterday, Val. She says, you note how architects use design thinking as they've been trained in design. Outside of security architects, cyber professionals have not been trained to think this way. Often we need to think fast and think cheap and put a fix in or put a solution in yesterday. How do we undo the way entire teams think to get them to design think? And although it may provide a more robust end product, does it have an impact on lead time to the solution? Complex question.
It is, yeah. I mean, okay, I understand if there's something urgent that you need to do, that you need to act fast. But I think you shouldn't stop there. If you have the resources and the capability to actually go back and then try to understand. But again, you'll have several constraints, like time constraints, resources. So you really need the backing of your executive management or to actually do this, because it's a new. It's all about trying out something new, and so that means there's going to be a learning curve. So you will need really the support of your management team.
Okay.
We can run the clock out now on this question, can't we? I'm seeing Andy. I'm frightened.
We're scared.
You probably should be. Professor Clark, the stage is yours.
No, please don't be scared. I was more scared when I saw that now everyone can see that I use a Fuji webcam.
Advertising, Andy, advertising.
I have no connection to that company and I make no money out of it. Anyway, that's an extraordinary presentation, and you put so much into that it's making my head hurt. I thought of one particular question, probably directed more to Rosanna. I've been quite privileged recently because I'm of a certain age, and I'm a linear thinker. I'm an engineer of a certain age, but I've been engaged in a couple of design thinking initiatives recently. One in general cybersecurity, and actually one in cyber deception. And I found it really challenging to throw away my normal thinking behaviors and think in a design space. The thing that helped me was working with people in other disciplines who are clearly proficient at that. But I wondered if we're going to try it, do you have an idea as to some good hints and tips that make that entry less painful?
I would say that I think what helps people is when they understand it a bit more. So I would encourage people to read up on it, and there are a lot of materials coming out of Stanford, the D School, Design School, and IDEO, and a lot of other people who have tried it out, maybe not in cybersecurity, but in other tech. I know there are some efforts actually in software development to use design thinking as well. So I think that if you just go out and do a Google search and see what's out there, what people are doing, and see that, you're not the only one testing this thing and people are making mistakes. And I think that helps, motivate you to try hard. And even when you feel like you're not getting it, it's hard really to change our behavior. I mean, so you have to find what motivates you. I mean, what would motivate me personally would be seeing, they're going through the same thing, and and this is what they're learning. So that would help me. I'm not sure what would help you. I mean, I know that motivates me. Maybe you're into reading books. You'd like to read books on it. There are lots of materials out there on design thinking. Or maybe you'd like to do a completely different, like, I don't know, go and learn how to design furniture. I know somebody who was a professor here at the University of Leuven, and she was doing nanotechnology. You know what she did? She enrolled herself in a design school, and she was shoe design. Okay, she was female. Okay, it's a terrible stereotype, but she was doing nanotechnology in her day job, and then she was doing this, starting this like class on shoe design. And you know what she's doing now? She set up a startup where she was like 3D printing shoes. So she didn't know she would end up there. But because she said, I'll just go somewhere where nobody knows me and nobody cares about my nanotechnology background, and I'll just learn something new. So it could be as simple as that.
If I can add here as well, there was I have some of the same problems, and one of the problems I have, Andy, is that sometimes my Lego block players don't come across very serious, and they don't understand me. They don't understand what I'm working for. And in particular, I've taken 2 of them aside, and I've done at least 6 hours where we do a deep dive into cybersecurity. What is it? What is the domain that I'm coming from? So I basically flip the question around and say, help me express who I am to you so that you can help me be part of this community better. I'm not saying it's easy. It is definitely painful. And I think there was a beginning quote that says, sometimes the things that they do seem utterly crazy. But I'm glad to hear that you're doing it, because we feel a lot less alone to hear that, because I think it's a really powerful tool.
Well, actually, I was introduced it by members of the COSAC community, so that's good. I realize we're out of time, so I'll shut up.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Andy.
Thank you.
Rosanna and Patrick, thank you both very much indeed for accepting the challenge of fitting a very challenging subject designed for half a day into 1 hour. Congratulations. Thank you both very much. For everyone else, we do have actually a queue of questions that remain unanswered, particularly from Peter Seedsma, from Parminda, and from Tariq. For Peter, Parminda, and Tariq, please do sign up for the networking event. Please do click on the link and go into the networking room immediately after sessions today, where you can find Rosanna and Patrick at a table and go ask those questions face to face. Thank you all very much indeed. That ends session 1. I'm just going to go to the green room and collect the next speaker. So you will see a message on the screen that says speaker getting ready. That will last only for a couple of moments, I hope, until we get Esther on stage. Again, Patrick and Rosanna, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you,
and
David.
we'll see you again in a few moments.
Thank you.